Some absolutely monumental news coming out of Tottenham Hotspur tonight. A bomber, as the kids would say. Daniel Levy stepping down as chairman after nearly 25 years in charge. Finally, it looks like there'll be some change in the way that the club operate in the hierarchy, something that fans have been calling out for years. Absolutely years and years and years. The club put out a statement today 20-6, saying Tottenham Hotspur announces that Daniel Levy has today stepped down from his role as executive chairman after nearly 25 years. As part of its succession planning, the club has made a number of senior appointments in recent months. Vinay Venkatesham was hired as chief executive officer, with Thomas Frank as our new men's head coach and Martin Ho as women's head coach. Peter Charrington joined the board and will step into the newly created role of non-executive chairman. So it really does look like there's just going to be plenty of changes. It's a bit of a weird one to talk about at the minute because not a lot of people know what's going on. Obviously, the club statement saying that Daniel Levy stepped down. I think there's reports from the Athletic around half an hour ago that by all means it wasn't as a mutual decision as it might have originally been painted out to be. Um, and a lot of suggestions that it will probably remain Enoch in charge and that um, under new stewardship, they'd really look to, take the club forward. And look, there's been rumours this summer about multiple investments in the club. There's been a lot of change. We've seen Donna Cullens left. Vinay Venkatesham has been installed, as the club statement would suggest. And it's a bit of a weird one because it almost feels like we've been waiting for this for such a long time. And now it's come, and I don't really know how to feel. If it is to be Enoch that carries on and pushes the club forward, then it's going to have to be a different approach to what it's been for the last 25 years because I don't think all the blame's at Daniel Levy's door. There's been suggestions that maybe Joe Lewis's family, the sort of children are really looking to address the lack of success on the pitch in recent years. And look, I think there's sort of been this bit of an undercurrent this summer um, that there is some sort of cash injection with Spurs. We've seen obviously Christian Romero signed the new deal, presumably on big wages. We saw Mohamed Kudus, 55 million, Javi Simmons around 60. Even players like Kolo Muani aren't going to be cheap on wages. And that's without bringing a lot of players in. And you think adding to that as well, the cost of bringing Thomas Frank to the club with all of his coaching staff, as well as sacking Ange Postecoglou. And, I think there might have been a few payoffs as well. Sergio Redondo, I think he's called, Mili Jedinak, that sort of thing. So it's not been a cheap summer by the clubs, from the club's point of view. And one thing that I think my biggest concern about Levy going, well, I wouldn't say concern, more reservation and it's more to do with generally the direction football's going in. Is this club, I've supported this club. I've been going from Bristol up to Tottenham roughly about 20 years now. Um, and it's all I think about. Is literally all I think about. About 80% of my day is dominated by that passion, that love. And I'm not the only one. There's millions and millions of people around the world who feel the same. And I just hope that it's that the club that I love, the club that if you're watching this, presumably if you're a Spurs fan, you love, the club that maybe your dad loves, your granddad loves, your mum loves, your brother, your sister, whoever. I don't want Tottenham Hotspur to be used as a sort of, political, used as a force to push political sort of ideology. And look, I'm hoping that Spurs aren't at that stage, but it seems more and more like, football now, you know, the currency of success is money. And, we see it with all sorts of different, you know, stuff that I don't think is really above. If it was looked into properly, I don't think it's really be above board. And I just really hope that the next people that come in, or even if it is to be a continuation of ENIC, that they need to remember what builds these football clubs. It's the fans. It's not the players. It's not the coaching staff. It is the fans who work all week just so they can afford to get a ticket and they'll go to the games. And that's, even locals, the pricing of the tickets really, really have not been good um, for quite a while now. And I think even, Spurs fans who live locally, uh, as in like very close to the stadium, I think some of them are even being priced out. And I really, really hope that, the fans are really, really at the forefront of this new sort of direction that the club are going in. Obviously, we all want success, but I think for me, the sort of way that the fans are treated and the sort of, I guess, it's just a bit of a respect for the fans. I think that is on a par with how successful Spurs are on the pitch. Obviously, the end goal that you want is for Spurs to be successful. But yeah, in terms of where we go from here, I just hope that the next continuation has the right intentions and that it won't be used to, you know, football won't be, the sort of plan B. That will be the priority. And I really hope that's the case. But moving on to Daniel Levy, in terms of just a tenureship, I think, you cannot be a fan of the way that Daniel Levy's run the club in the last decade or so. But you have to give him his flowers, especially in the way that football's gone in terms of sustainability and revenue. He's set us up perfectly to push on to that next stage. And it's a weird one because I can remember even doing a stadium tour of White Hart Lane, and it must have been around 2009, 2010, I want to say, that sort of era. And there was always, whenever you'd be showed around, it would always be like, oh yeah, this is the stadium that we want to, move on to. This will kick Spurs onto the next level. And it was almost sort of like, okay, that's something. Not that I was thinking this consciously about it as an 8-year-old, but in hindsight, it sort of felt like, oh, that stadium, that could be quite cool if that happens. And then you think now that, for me, I genuinely think we've got the best ground in the world. I think the work that the club has done to sort of try and retain all of the good, you know, all of the good feeling around White Hart Lane and that sense of that, community spirit that people have been walking down there since the 20s. Now in the 2020s, they're walking down there and it's carrying on tradition. And I think one thing with Daniel Levy, as much as you want to give him stick, that stadium is a game changer. And I genuinely think that if it got to 2019 and he said, right, we're in the stadium, I've delivered, I'm off now, his perception would be completely different. I think he was a bit ahead of his time in the mid 2000s in terms of you know building revenue, building other sources of income for the club, having a vision in the new stadium and reaching that point. And that was really, really forward thinking, and that's always, that at the time was sort of seen as him doing his job and putting Spurs on to the next level. And that would be what you'd want as a chairman, someone who has sort of the best interests of the club. Obviously, it is within the interest of the club to move to a new stadium because obviously that'll build more revenue and then it helps, pay off for the debts and so on and so forth. I don't have a lot of the business acumen, none actually, but if he'd left in 2015 to 2019, any of that time period, it would be completely different. But the reality is that since we've moved into this new stadium, And I think you could even go a bit further back to maybe 2016, that sort of time. From that time onwards, I really, really think all of the good work that he'd done in the years that we'd mentioned previously, that sort of time period of the mid 2000s, I feel like a lot of, not all of it, but I feel like a very, very large amount of it was undone from about 2017, 2018 onwards, that sort of period. Because, and I know that clubs move into new stadiums, and look, I'm not completely stupid. I know that, when you go into these stadiums, they don't pay for themselves. There's got to be sort of one step back to take two steps forward sometimes. And that was understandable, but I think it got to a point where he would just keep making the same mistakes over and over and over. And if I'm honest, I think ever since we've sacked Pochettino, it feels like we're in the same rut of, we'll sack a manager and then we'll get a new manager. That new manager will start doing well, we'll build, we'll look like we're going places. And just when that point is when you want to push on, we'll never, never quite get there. This summer, a little bit different. Wasn't a completely perfect window, but is a very, very good start if this is, Enix's vision moving forward and the way they want to operate. But to be at the top and to remain at the top and to get to the top, you need to be ruthless. And for someone with the business acumen that Daniel Levy's had, you know, the success to, reach where he's got to in his career and in his life, that will be based off being ruthless. And we just weren't that when it comes to the football, prioritizing the football, which is so odd because he clearly, clearly has that ability to get to, for him to get to where he's got to in life. There's no way he wouldn't have had that. And you really, really got the sense that football wasn't the main priority. I look, I'm not completely against, these other sorts of the work they've done in terms of the community around the new stadium and the jobs it offers and sort of the general sort of gentrification of Tottenham. That goes beyond the football, and that obviously helps the local people tenfold. But what I will say is that winning's winning's the best formula. That's what you get judged on. It's what the players get judged on. It's what the manager will get judged on. And after a while, it's what the chairman will get judged on. And we just didn't win enough. We really haven't. I think it's a crucial, crucial period. This Daniel Levy era will be a crucial, crucial period in Tottenham Hotspur's history, and he will be remembered in Tottenham's history because he was obviously the face of the new stadium, and that was his sort of vision, and he delivered on that, and that deserves a lot of praise, as well as using his business acumen to think of things like concerts at the stadium, that sort of thing, building other revenue streams. Which, and he said, look, he said in the interview with Gary Neville the other day, maybe I won't be appreciated till I'm gone. And look, that could be the case, but the reality is, Daniel, if you were watching this, doubt you would be. But if you are, come on. But when it comes to the football, a club like Spurs, if you go back through the history of the club, the 60s, we were winning trophies. The 70s, we were winning trophies. The 80s, we were winning trophies. The 90s, largely bowl accounts, pretty crap after the 91 FA Cup final in terms of the club's development and, really pushing home that winning culture. But also, if you speak to some Spurs fans, they'll say, well, we did go and get Klinsmann, we did have Ginola, we did have Les Ferdinand, we did have Teddy Sheringham. So it's those sorts of players where, and look, I wasn't around in the 90s, so maybe, I'm just chatting out my ass here. But what I will say is there's always that sort of sense that Spurs, yeah, they might not be in the best position, but they are capable of doing something. And I feel like the club's always had a really big potential that's just not been tapped into. And now that Levy's gone, he's overseen the new stadium. I'm hoping that that's the point where we really push on because for a lot of, there'll be so many Spurs fans who would have grown up on maybe Bill Nicholson's 61 team or, Keith Birkinshaw's team that won the UEFA Cup and, the other cups that followed that maybe fell in love with the 91 FA Cup win with Gaza. And that's why they support Tottenham. And from that point onwards, there's never, in terms of trophies, there's been the Worthington Cup in '99 and the 2008 League Cup, and then Europa League. And if you take the Europa League away, the two League Cups, they're obviously nice trophies to win, but they don't really move the needle in terms of how much more attractive that makes a club. Um, and I think that Europa League really, I'm really hoping that it's just a catapult to push us on to better things because it looks like there's new investment coming, whether that's, people, an investor from outside or Enoch putting more money in. But it really looks like Spurs are pushing in that next direction that we really, really, fans of sort of my age, like I mentioned before, they obviously we've had amazing players like Son, Kane, go back to some of the players that, Dele Alli, some of the players that I think of when I first think of Spurs, like Dimitar Berbatov, Robbie Keane. And, maybe I was a bit too young to appreciate the 2008 League Cup, but they're always sort of, yeah, they're a good player, but there's never really been a definitive team that wins. And that's been the big frustration with Spurs is that, that Pochettino team is sort of the most talked about team in the modern era. And there is a sense of just a bit sad when you look back at that and you think Dele Alli was had the Premier League in a chokehold, young player of the year 2 years in a row, and then you've got Son on the left who's coming into form. You had Ericsson, you had Kane, you had Wanyama, Dembele, Rose, Walker, Vertonghen, Alderweireld, Lloris, and all of these players, and it really felt like that period where we really should have won something. It was such a shame that we didn't capitalize on that. And that team is always going to be remembered as the team that didn't win anything, the team that come really close and give us some of the best football we've seen at Spurs. Certainly the best football I've seen in my lifetime. But there's always that sort of overarching thing of, well, they didn't win anything. And I'd hate for us for that to become a constant, sort of narrative associated with Spurs teams moving forward. And I really hope that the Europa League has changed that. Um, and in terms of where that puts Spurs at the end of a busy summer, you have to say it has been intense. It has been really, really intense since about 2 weeks after the Europa League trophy parade. We've obviously got the news of Ange being sacked, and even that took a while. In and on a lot. It all playing out publicly and not really being a good look on the club. Then you've got Thomas Frank coming in, and then you've got a lot of people saying about why aren't we signing anyone? We signed Kudus. It looks like we're signing Gibbs White as well. So that's looking good. And then that doesn't happen. That's another saga that plays out in the media, a bit too public for Spurs. No one really knows what's going on there. And then you've got Son leaving, such a huge, huge player, reliable Spurs legend. I cannot say enough good things about Son. You've got him leaving, and you think of not only the goals and assists and the performance output, but you also think of that star sort of attraction. He was a poster boy for Spurs, and then he's gone. So you're thinking, yeah, okay, maybe it's James Maddison. Maybe it's perfectly set up for him. Back from injury, new manager, new ideas, vice captain, never played in the Champions League, the perfect perfect time for him to come in and step in and be the guy that will take us forward and put him onto that next level, which will probably get him into being an England international. And then he does his ACL. And then you've got the Super Cup. Looks like we're winning it. That doesn't happen. 5 minutes to go, can surrender a 2-goal lead. That doesn't happen. And then you've got Burnley starting well. And then you've also got news about Abere Eze coming in. That's looking all good. And then that doesn't happen. And that all plays out again publicly. And it wasn't a good look on Daniel Levy. And I really, really think that this summer was really his last straw. For me, I've always sort of been on the fence about Daniel Levy, but the Super League decision was an absolute disgrace. It was a disgusting, disgusting move. Whoever was involved in the arrangements for that should have been sacked there and then and been banned from the stadium, because to try and I get the transfer frustrations. That's mainly been one of the big talking points that people put at Levy's door for his time at Spurs. But that Super League decision to completely blindside the fans, the rest of English football, no sort of consultation, that really, really made me. I think that was the first time, the only time in my life I felt a little bit embarrassed by my club. There's been times when we've had embarrassing results, but I've never ever felt embarrassed by Tottenham. But that was the line. And look, it didn't happen in the end. It all worked out in the end. Um, a big change at Spurs this summer. Obviously, all the stuff I mentioned. You got Romero, new deal, new captain, Simmons, Kudus, Paulinho, Kolo Muani, all coming in, as well as Koto Takai. Changes afoot at Spurs, and I hope it's good change. Um, and now all this all that's left to do really is to sit and wait. And with Spurs, that's usually quite a worrying prospect. So I'll see you in the next one. Up the Spurs.